Good morning. See, I didn't die the first service, so lucky for you, you get to hear me do this today. So, as Joel said, my name is Allison, and my official title here is Next Steps Director. You didn't hear pastor in there, so what I'm doing up here is yet to be determined by all of us. But we'll be okay, because one thing that I love about Bridgeway is that we're a church that believes that women have a seat at the table, or a place on this stage, if you will, that their voices should be heard and that their insight has value. So I always thought it would be some other woman, though, so it's okay, though. We're here, so I'm going to introduce myself a little bit in case you don't know me or we haven't met. So this is my family. This is the best picture we've ever taken, just so you know. I could have put a lot of tragic things up here. So right next to me is my husband, Nick. This year we will actually celebrate our 20th anniversary, so we got married when I was 12, obviously, because I'm so young. And next to me is our oldest daughter, Mackenzie. She is a freshman at Ball State. Actually made the dean's list first semester, so chirp, chirp. And then our youngest daughter, Lauren, who first service wasn't actually in here, and this service she is. So we can all just stare at her a little bit. You can't online, but just imagine that you are, okay? She's a freshman at Western, and then this is our dog, Wrigley, and she is 8. So that is us, but one thing that you may not know about me is that while most weeks I am up here telling you about all of the exciting things going on at Bridgeway during the announcements, I am scared to death. Every single time. You would think coming up to give the announcements, it's like 2 minutes, not that big of a deal, right? Nope, sweating through my clothes every single week. I know, really disgusting, I'm so sorry, but that's the reality. I make friends at the grocery store, but speaking in front of all of you tends to make me a little afraid. So, what is something that you are afraid of this morning? I have a couple of pictures, so if you're online in the chat, you can just put the little emoji that's like this, the hand raising, it's me, okay? And if you're in the room, we're gonna participate here. Okay, so, first picture, spiders. Anyone afraid of spiders? Just my girls? Lauren, I see you, I know, okay? It doesn't matter how far away they are, they're hollering for someone to come kill it, okay? Maybe it's this next one for you. Heights? Jumping out of a plane? Anybody else in here jumped out of a plane? Just me? No? Oh, you've jumped out of a plane? I love that. This is the booming metropolis of Frankfurt right here, just so you know, because this is actually me right here jumping out of a plane. Okay, so maybe it's this next one for you. Speaking in front of a crowd like this. Maybe you could be up here? No? Yes? Can you imagine crowds like that? Also, maybe it's this one, merging onto the interstate, lots of traffic. Okay, my mom was here the first service, and I had to give her a shout out because this is her. She will dead stop on an exit rather than merge on an interstate if there's a lot of traffic. Do not recommend, okay? But maybe this is you, and that's okay. So what's one thing that you used to be afraid of that maybe you're not anymore, though? Okay, this one's mine, the movie Jaws. Okay, so, right? Even the theme music is super scary. But as I got a little bit older and I did a little deep dive into the movie for whatever reason, because I'm weird like that, this shark didn't even work half the time. It was a mechanical shark on a pulley, and they had to change a lot of the scenes because most of the time it was broken. I didn't know that. So at the time it was super scary, but now I'm like, this is dumb. Why was I scared of this, okay? But when I asked, one of the guys in the office as I was getting this ready, they said, talking to girls. Come on, guys, we are not that scary most of the time, okay? Sometimes we are. But since we're in church, let's talk about it kind of in a spiritual aspect. Do you ever feel like God has called you to do something and you were afraid, so you didn't do it? Maybe it was giving money to a cause, but you aren't totally flushed up with cash. Maybe it's speaking up for something that you know is wrong, but you're the only person speaking. So why don't we always do what he calls us to do, though? I think it's because we're afraid. And I believe and I think today that you'll discover that fear and faith can coexist as long as you push through and don't let it paralyze you. Okay, evidence A, why I'm standing up here today, okay? So I'm sure you've heard this before, that fear and worry are sins, and God tells us not to be anxious. Well, if he says it, easy peasy, done and done, guess we're no longer anxious or full of fear and worry, right? Not quite. So if I had $1, though, for every time I have heard this in my life, I would be a rich lady, and I'm not, okay? So there's some truth to these words, but like with most things, it's just part of the story. So if you're anything like me and you struggle with anxiety, fear, worry, but you're also a Christian, you may feel out of place. You may hear that statement, and it's not super helpful because it brings guilt and shame. No one wants to be anxious. Literally no one on the planet wants to feel anxious and worry. And I felt like an outsider in the Christian community for a long time because fear is a legitimate struggle for me, and it always has been. So does that make me a defective Christian? Does it make you a defective Christian because you feel anxiety? Like possibly if they knew how much you struggle with fear, you'd be thrown out with a shiny new Bible with a Post-it note on it that says, read this, okay? Maybe you're with us this morning and you don't know if you even believe the whole Bible Jesus thing. First of all, we're glad you're with us, but second of all, isn't anxiety and fear and worry still an issue for you too? Wouldn't it be great if sometimes Christians would stop oversimplifying things and admit that life is messy and hard and complicated? Yes, please. Okay, let's stop doing that. So faith and fear can coexist, and I've probably asked this, can it? This is a question I've asked myself probably 1,000 times over my life, probably more than that. I've consistently heard the message that if you have faith in Jesus, then you can't have fear, that it's one or the other. You either have fear or you have faith. But I don't buy into that idea anymore because I honestly don't believe that God's the one selling it. I found a lot of freedom because I've kind of let the one or the other go. And I know what you're going to say, but God says, do not be afraid. And you're right. He probably says it more than 350 times in the Bible, actually. But I think maybe we've missed something with the whole fear and anxiety bashing, and it's that fear is just an emotion, a God-given emotion, okay? So the truth is, it's normal to feel fear. It's totally normal. You'd be really weird if you didn't, actually, because fear can be helpful at times, right? It's the reason why after you've touched a hot stove once, you don't go do it again because you're afraid of getting burned. It's the reason why you don't walk on the ledge of a mountain without a harness because you're afraid you're gonna fall off, okay? So it's not that we shouldn't ever feel fear. We're just not supposed to obey it. So I think that these things get confused. I believe that fear and faith can coexist because one drives us to the other. We feel fear, but we can choose God's truth. So I've heard a lot in religious circles, maybe you've never heard this before, kind of hope you haven't, but maybe you have, that fear is really just unbelief in disguise. So when Jesus walked the earth, an eyewitness named Mark recorded some of the incredible things that Jesus did that we now find in our Bibles. And Mark chapter 9 records a story of a father whose son had been possessed since birth. He had terrible seizures, convulsions that threw him into a fire, into water. He gnashed his teeth. Nothing this father had tried had helped. So he brings him to the disciples in hopes of getting him healed. The disciples, no such luck, not able to heal him. And so this father is seeking out Jesus because as parents, won't we go through the ends of the earth to figure out how to help our children? In Mark 9:22, the father says, if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. Jesus answered that all things are possible to those that believe. The father replied, Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. So we can have faith in Jesus and fear of the unknown. To cry out and admit that we are unsure does not negate the faith that we have. I don't recall Jesus telling this father that he was some big sinner because he had fear and unbelief. He actually rewarded his admittance by fulfilling his request to increase his faith when he healed his son. God knew what an enormous struggle this would be for so many people. I think that's why he says not to be afraid so often, not to condemn us, but to encourage us. So I no longer buy into the thinking that Christians shouldn't fear. I mean, that's silly, honestly. We will fear. We're human beings. What matters most is what we do with that fear. So the question no longer is, are you fearful, but where are you taking your fear? And whom are you seeking for help? So when God directs us to be strong and courageous in Joshua 1:9, it's not because you need to be some sort of superhero and never feel afraid or anxious. It's because he knows we need reminded of the fact that in our fear we can choose faith. And we aren't alone, okay? This struggle with fear and doing what we are called to do is as old as humanity, okay? Generations before Jesus was born, God's people were in slavery. He wanted to use a man named Moses to set them free. Sounds amazing, right? Moses, if I'm Moses, I'm like, yes, sign me up. I get to be the superhero of this story. I will be right there. Just let me know how to get there. So how does Moses handle the situation, though? One day Moses was tending his father-in-law's flock. He led the flock to Mount Sinai. There an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement, as I'm sure we all would, like, but because the bush wasn't burning up. Then, like most men, this is my commentary, most men, he thought, I'm going to go see this up close, which is also why women live longer, okay? Just throwing that out there too. So then, when the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, Moses, Moses, here I am, Moses replied. So shout out to Moses for being super willing, right? He's like, the Lord, here I am. Like, he proceeded to tell him, though, that he had seen the oppression of his people in Egypt. He had heard their cries, was aware of their suffering. So he came down to rescue them and lead them out of Egypt. He just needed Moses to do one thing. No big deal, right? I can do one hard thing. Just let me know what it is, right? He said, now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people, Israel, out of Egypt. Sounds like a plan, right? When do we leave? No big deal. But Moses protested to God. Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? God answered, I will be with you, and this is your sign that I am the one who has sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain. But Moses protested, if I go to the people of Israel and tell them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they will ask me, what is his name? Then what should I tell them? God replied to Moses, I am who I am. We see Moses starting to kind of pump the brakes. It might have been a little icy this morning on your drive in, so same thing. The road's getting a little icy. Moses is like, I don't know, maybe not. So the Lord tries to slow him down, reassure him a little, telling him, I'll perform all these miracles. I will make sure these people like you. Don't worry about it. We've got this. You're good. But Moses protested again. What if they won't believe me or listen to me? What if they say, the Lord never appeared to you? So the Lord gave him 3 miraculous signs that he performed to convince people. 3, as if the first one wasn't enough. The second one might not be good enough. 3, right? Then another, just to be on the safe side, reassure him over and over. But Moses pleaded with the Lord, oh Lord, I'm not very good with words. I never have been, and I'm not now. Even though you have spoken to me, I get tongue-tied and my words get tangled. Then the Lord asked Moses, who makes a person's mouth? Who decides whether people speak or do not speak, hear or do not hear, see or do not see? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will be with you as you speak, and I will instruct you in what to say. But Moses again pleaded, Lord, please send anyone else. As you can imagine, the Lord was not amused. In fact, he was angry, it states in the next verse. So I know that was a lot to take in, so I'm going to break it down in my own little everyday language. Joel has Larisonians that he puts up on the screen sometimes, so we can call these Alisonians if you would like. Okay. So Moses says, here I am. And God says, great, here's what I need you to do. So Moses says, first excuse, why me? Like, who am I? God says, you're going to be great. I'll be with you. No big deal. Moses, second excuse, what if they try to talk to me? What if they ask me questions? God says, this is exactly what you'll say. Then I'll perform wonders and wow them, and I'll make them pleased with you. What else do you want from me? I've told you we have this under control. Moses with his third excuse, what if they don't listen, though? What if they don't listen to me? God says, if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. Moses coming in with his fourth excuse, have you ever heard me talk? I don't speak very well. God says, that's so rude. I gave you that mouth. Moses says, fifth excuse, for the love of all that's holy, no thank you. Please send anyone else. Moses wasn't alone in his fear and excuses either, though. Abraham, Joshua, Gideon, Jonah, Esther, I could go on. They all had excuses for why they didn't want to or couldn't do the thing that God was asking them to do. All of them were called to be outside this comfortable spot that they were in, and they were afraid. They were full of fear and excuses, just like us at times. Generations later in the New Testament with Jesus, even when he called his disciples, he didn't call them to be where they were. Matthew, who was another eyewitness to Jesus' life and ministry, recorded in his gospel in chapter 8, starting in verse 18, that when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he instructed his disciples to cross the other side of the lake. Then one of the teachers of religious law said to him, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. But Jesus replied, Foxes have dens to live in and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place even to lay his head. Another of his disciples said, Lord, first let me return home and bury my father. But Jesus told him, Follow me now. Let the spiritually dead bury their own dead. He said, Follow me now. Leave what you know behind, because once you are in my presence, you'll see and experience things you've never seen before. I will literally change your life, but you have to follow me now. Then in the very next verse, it states that, Then Jesus got into the boat and started across the lake with his disciples. Suddenly, a fierce storm struck the lake, with waves breaking into the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him up, shouting, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. Jesus responded, Why are you afraid? You have so little faith. Then he got up and rebuked the wind and waves, and suddenly there was a great calm. Jesus asked the disciples in the boat, Why are you afraid? In a boat, in the middle of a storm. Fear feels like a pretty realistic response to me. I don't know about you. But Jesus didn't give the disciples a pass. He expects more of his disciples, because if he's the Lord of your life, then he's trustworthy. But I also don't think that Jesus uses these moments to condemn us or to make us feel terrible about ourselves, right? He uses them as teachable moments to make us better people, not to chastise us, but to encourage us and teach us a new way. So when I think back to Moses or the disciples and all of their many excuses, I also think of myself. When Joel asked me to give this talk, I had all of the excuses. I could still give you some this morning if you'd like, just so you know. I'm keeping a list. I'm not a pastor. I didn't go to Bible college. I don't know the Bible inside and out. People will ask me questions that I will not know the answers to. I'm going to sound ridiculous, 100%. Some of you are counting on that. I'm not qualified. I'm going to have to change clothes between services because did I mention that I sweat a lot? Okay. And what am I even going to talk about? Because he said I could talk about anything I want. Super broad, okay? So who does that sound like? Moses? Maybe you? At the tail end of Moses' life, though, he took all that he had learned from his fear and tried to speak into Joshua, who was going to succeed him to be the next leader of Israel, a different way. So in Deuteronomy 31:8, Moses tells Joshua, "The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged." For me, this is Moses' version of, this is what I wish I would have known when I was younger, kind of a story. You don't have to be afraid or discouraged because the Lord himself has already gone before you and will be with you during whatever it is that he has called you to. You can trust him. Even when his ways do not look like your ways, even when you can't even tell what his way is quite yet, he is trustworthy. So what do we see in all of these examples of those who have gone before us? They all felt the emotion of fear. They were all anxious. They all stumbled before they ran and did what God called them to do. But they chose to turn the volume down on their fear and turn the volume up on God's presence and faithfulness in their lives. They made him louder and their fear quieter. So how do we do that today? How do we move past our fear to make 2021 a year of adventure, of following Jesus and discovering the joy that he has for us on the journey? Is that easier said than done? I have a few practical ways that I think we might be able to help and push through this together. So the first one is just say yes. Now, I'm talking about saying yes to the things that Jesus has for your life. And I'm going to do a little side note here. Ladies, I am not talking about saying yes to everything ever, okay? Because our plates, we tend to pile them up so full that things start falling on the ground and we're trying to figure out how we can juggle everything. That is not what I'm talking about. In fact, you probably need to start saying no to some things if we're being totally honest, right? Okay, but what I'm talking about is saying yes to the things that make your heart beat faster, the things that light the fire inside your gut, the things that get you super excited about, not every single little thing that someone asks you to do. That is definitely not where we are this morning. So what is that for you, though? In 2012, it was a rough year for our family, okay? There was tragic death. I was unemployed. There were loss of relationships. There was extreme sickness, unrest in our marriage. It was rough. But we were in a small group, and we were going through a study from Christian author Bob Goff called Love Does, when we got to a chapter about being available if God calls. And the illustration he used was being tied to a dock, a boat being tied to a dock. So are you free to sail or are you tied to the dock was kind of the illustration. And for the first time ever, my husband said he felt like he was free to sail. And I was both proud and confused all at the same time in that moment with everything that had been going on. So that very next day, I was at work when I get a call from Jason Braun, who's the executive director of Dad Camp, and he asked if Nick and our oldest Mackenzie would be willing to go on a trip to Haiti with Dad Camp the following summer. So this was literally like me looking up like, you were listening? Like, is he actually free to sail like he said, or is he tied to the dock? This was the put your money where the mouth is kind of moment. And so passports were purchased, funds were raised, shots were given, and they both set out for their very first trip out of the country for either of their lives, and it was a game changer. I'm not going to cry. They visited 2 locations that summer and put on 2 Dad Camp events where fathers were able to spend one-on-one time with their kids, speak love into them, speak life over them, some of them for the very first time ever. Nick has since been on 1 additional trip to Haiti with Mackenzie and 1 to Guatemala. You can peep some additional Bridgeway fabulous members in this picture as well. It's a little throwback, but I'm excited about it. So are you free to sail or fly? If that's what it takes, or even just walk across the street and talk to your neighbor. I don't want to ask what's the worst that can happen, right? Because we don't want to get stuck in the land of excuses again. But what's the best that could happen? And whose life could you possibly change? If we're being honest, it'll probably be your own. So, second practical tip I'd like to offer you is to turn your fear into friendship. How will you do your part to bring a small piece of heaven to earth? Is it that unfamiliar neighbor that we were talking about? Is it the coworker that no one wants to really hang out with? Is it the stranger that doesn't look like you? My family gives me a really hard time, like I said, because I make friends at the grocery store. I'm that person that if you're in the ice cream aisle and you're holding ice cream, I want to know if it's good. Have you had it before? Should I get this? I want to know. Or maybe we are commiserating in the coffee creamer aisle because you have something that doesn't look like sugar cookie coffee creamer, and I'm not really sure what you're trying to do with your life. Healthy, like unsweetened something? It's so weird. I don't understand. Sometimes people look at me weird, and that's okay. I'm fine with it. I'm also the person that is encouraging the mom who has 3 kids hanging out of the cart who are crying, screaming, trying to grab things off the shelf, and telling her that she's doing an amazing job, because sometimes there's solidarity in knowing that someone sees you and they value you and they encourage you. I mean, if I could give you all a high five for just getting out of bed and getting here this morning, I would do it. But we're in a pandemic and you need to sanitize your hands first. But life is hard. And we need to appreciate and encourage and value people more for giving the effort that they give. People just want to be seen and appreciated. So high five to all of you. And online, this is your virtual high five. Okay, this is probably the safer way, honestly. But I don't always get it right. Remember, I'm that same person with fear and insecurities just like you. We've lived in our house for 13 years, and it took 2020 to let me meet my neighbor, our direct next-door neighbor, who I had not met in 13 years through a series of weird events. But I met our neighbor. But who else have I avoided or not made friends with because I was afraid? Maybe we didn't have anything in common, I thought. Maybe they wouldn't like me. Maybe I'm not good enough, okay? Maybe I'm afraid of being rejected. But I've probably missed out on some really great people, if we're being honest, and probably some amazing opportunities because I was afraid and I didn't throw myself out there. So whatever you do, though, it does not have to be extravagant. Sometimes the smallest gestures mean more than some sort of expensive gift that you could give. The text you send to someone who's been going through the ringer, the coffee you drop off to a friend who's stuck at home with sick kids or a sick spouse, ladies, or the meal you drop off or have Pizza Hut deliver because you don't cook. I could go on, right? But who's coming to your mind who might need someone to come alongside of them and say, I see you, I'm with you, we're in this together, I will not leave you, you've got this. Third tip. Choose vision over visibility. So vision is the picture that you want your life to look like or that God wants your life to look like. And visibility is the clear picture of how you're going to get there. Maybe you already know where you're being called. Maybe you've had that knot in the pit of your stomach for a while and it won't go away. It's not going to go away, okay? You have to do something about it. Maybe it's frightening because you know what you should be doing, but you don't know how you'd get there. How will you finance it? Who will come with us? Who's going to help me? Just start somewhere. You don't have to know all the answers to every single question on day one. You just have to start with the first step. So once quarantine started, this is another little something about me that you hopefully don't know. Once quarantine started, my girls talked me into joining TikTok. Maybe you don't know what TikTok is, but it's a social media platform that people post short video clips. There's a lot of dancing, there's celebrity voiceovers, there's people falling down, there's even potatoes, okay? I mean, there's lots of different TikToks. But one person that kept showing up on my page, who I found super inspiring, was this lady. Her name is Mrs. Space Cadet. Her real name's Erin, but I feel like Mrs. Space Cadet and I would be BFFs, right? She was supposed to run a marathon in November 2020. She had never run a single day in her life before last spring, and then like most things in 2020, the marathon got canceled. Most of us, me, would have stopped training, stopped running, started eating my feelings and wallowing in all that 2020 had taken from us, but not her. She kept running, kept pushing, kept literally putting one foot in front of the other. And even though her marathon was canceled, she still ran one in November and has since started training for the next one with the goal of hoping to run it just a little bit faster. So you may not be able to see the forest through the trees, as they say, but everyone has a day one. So fight through the fear and lean into your faith until you get to day 2, day 22, or mile 26.2 if that's your thing. Maybe you want to read the Bible cover to cover this year. Okay, find an app that'll send you notifications or help you to remember to read, or just start with chapter 1. Maybe you want to go back to school. Set an admissions appointment, call, schedule. What's the worst that can happen, right? You call and set an appointment and just see what can happen. Maybe you want to get more involved in the community this year. There is a whole host of nonprofits that would love your help. Call, email, send somebody a message. They will love to have you, okay? So just start somewhere. That's the goal. So here's the bottom line. The good news, and I hope this is good news for you as well, is that Jesus died for the worrier, the fearful, the anxious, and the controller just as much as anyone else. If you struggle with fear or worry, just remember the Father that pleaded for his son's life that I talked about a little bit earlier. He said, "I believe, help my unbelief." He acknowledged his belief and his fear in the same breath, and you can too. So instead of focusing on your battle with fear and your perceived lack of faith, acknowledge that you do believe. You're just struggling in this moment. We're not defective Christians, okay? Do you hear me in the back? We're not defective Christians because we feel fear. We're humans that need encouragement to lean into our faith. So turn down the volume on your fear and the what ifs, and turn up the volume on believing that God is with you, because adventure is just on the other side of following him into the unknown. Jesus said it best, obviously, in John 12:27. He said, "I am leaving you with a gift, peace of mind and heart. And the peace I give is a gift the world cannot give. So don't be troubled or afraid." I'd love for you to stand with me. I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to pray for myself. And then the band is going to lead us in one final song this morning. Lord, today we talked about turning down the noise and the fear and our anxiousness and our worrisome tendencies, and turning up the volume on you and your gratefulness and your trustworthiness and all that you have for our lives. Lord, we know that you have already gone before us. You are with us. You will not leave us or forsake us, Lord. We know that we can do all things because you have made it so. So, Lord, in 2021, help us to just put 2020 in the past and our fears and everything that came with that, and make 2021 just something so focused and full of you and the joy that you bring, that we would just be so overwhelmed that we would not, there's nothing else that we could do than to follow you, because we've turned down all the noise and the fear that the world pushes into us. So Lord, I just ask that you be with us, be with this band as they lead us in one final song, to just break off the chains that entangle us and bind us up, Lord, and just free us this year. In your name I pray. Amen.